Welcome to Convergence.fm. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanand.
Build stuff that you have an intuition for where the world is going to go so you can build some capabilities and learnings in it. Try to go work with those vendors that are powering that new trend so then you can say, hey, you be the platform, we'll help with the services and implementation, and we can kind of go to business together.
On the show, we explore how purpose-driven leaders align their culture, operations, and experimentation to de-risk the decisions that really matter and lead AI-enabled businesses with clarity. Convergence.fm. Transform from the inside out. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Convergence.fm. Today we're going to be talking about AI execution and doing that at scale. I think it's really relevant because there's a number of CEOs, business owners, even board members that I'm talking to that kind of have a lot of noise in their system, a lot of AI chatter. There's strategy talk, there's proofs of concepts, maybe even delegation of installing Copilot to your CIOs. Very few that are actually shipping things that work to create insightful learning for the organization, let alone measurable impact to the business. Our guest today, Jay Singh, and his team at Casper are amazing to talk about this topic. And they're one of a small number of AI development firms that I would personally trust to build real business product. They've delivered large-scale consumer activations with huge brands, Netflix, Pepsi, including a Stranger Things voice AI experience, generated over 400,000 phone calls from Stranger Things fans. At the same time, they're also working with hedge funds and private equity firms to drive meaningful workflow improvements inside complex, high-stakes, sometimes regulated environments. So I think their deep engineering combined with product expertise gives them that range, and that's important. Before starting Casper, Jay Singh led major initiatives at LinkedIn, including the identity verification feature. You're probably on LinkedIn and you've likely seen that little verification checkbox next to your profile. Tens of millions of members have gone through that process like you have. And that's trust infrastructure at global scale. And as we'll get into the episode, it means they've had to navigate regulation, policy, product complexity, and engineering that scales and have it work seamlessly for a brand like LinkedIn across the hundreds of countries that they work in. So when he talks about implementing AI inside real organizations, I trust that it's coming from someone who has operated at that level. I also really respect the way that Jay is building his business. In addition to taking a very measured and structured approach to growing Casper, he also follows his gut and curiosity. If he sees something interesting in the space, he'll get his team to prototype it, and they even launch it as a product, even though they're a services firm. They test, they learn, and then they use that learning to inform their client work so their clients benefit. And it also, as he talks about in the episode, helps them with building partnerships that leads to major client acquisition across businesses like Netflix and Pepsi. And yes, I'll admit, I am a little bit biased about Jay because he's a fellow Canadian technology entrepreneur who's come back to the United States to build. On the episode, we're going to focus on where AI is actually working in the enterprise, how to approach adoption inside traditional businesses. I love the list that we're going to talk about where to get started with AI, and what it really takes to move from experimentation to real production that represents your brand and the level of trust that you should earn as a business. If you're serious about building AI in a way that fosters learning and drives meaningful outcomes for your business, I think you're going to get a lot out of this one. Here is Jay Singh from Casper AI on Convergence.fm. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Hey, Jay, I've been super excited to have you guys on. Congrats, by the way, on landing a project with Netflix. That's quite super impressive for a firm that's your age and really speaks to the capability. So for anyone that's not experienced what you built with Netflix, break that down for us first.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. We're still a little bit shocked at how all that came together, and we're reflecting on the year as we're kind of wrapping up 2025, and that definitely is one of our highlights. What that was a marketing activation for a collaboration between Netflix and Pepsi. It was for the season 5 of Stranger Things. So if anybody watches Stranger Things here, we knew that the final season was happening kind of near Thanksgiving and November, December. And so leading up to that go live for the season, they wanted to do a marketing activation where they had a 80s themed telethon experience where you could call a number and that kind of gets directed into a certain amount of voice AI actors, whether it's David Hasselhoff, Paul Abdul, or Alf. And there you can kind of speak to these characters and the whole point of it was to be able to leave a message of hope for the city of Hawkins, and so that whole experience was actually put across billboards and mainly actually the kind of key places on a Doritos bag. And so over the past 6 months, maybe like 3 to 6 months, if you walked into like a bodega in New York or a corner store or superstore or whatever, you can go see like a little Doritos bag. It had a number on it, and fans can be able to call that. And we were the ones who kind of built that voice AI experience, and the results of it are amazing. The kind of TLDR on that is ended up having 400,000 calls on that
Wow.
experience. That ended up being the second most kind of called consumer voice experience to date behind ChatGPT, as told to us by the vendor that powers both, which we can get into a little bit later. So that was crazy. In terms of engagement, on top of that, we saw 70,000 people leave messages of hope. So people literally recording themselves and saying, "Hey, like I hope the city of Hawkins like can get back on its feet," and all these positive messages. And then that was actually then put into like pretty major physical activations, like Times Square and a bunch of places in LA. And we just heard recently that actually in store it drove 30% more revenue versus other Doritos bags while the Doritos bags were there. Because fans of Stranger Things really love Stranger Things and they just want to be able to collect as much memorabilia as they can. And so it was a really crazy experience to kind of go from 0 to 1 on that. It taught us a lot about marketing activations generally. Taught us a lot about how to be able to work at like with media entertainment companies, how they think about things, but also taught us obviously a lot about how to build voice AI kind of products at production at scale, minimal bugs, all those things. So yeah, it was a ton of fun.
That's amazing. Congrats. I'm curious, when it comes to marketing activation, there's not a ton of experience that I have. Like, did Netflix expect like six figures of people calling in when during the early meetings? Like, what kind of goals did they have, and like how big of a leap of faith was this, or a shot in the dark compared to like where it landed?
It was yeah, people in marketing say that you spend on marketing and 50% will drive results of the budget. You just don't know which 50%. We definitely experience elements of that where we come from tech, we come from product and finance, et cetera, and so we're very measured in our goals and where we want to go and what success looks like. The marketing activation in this case was more like, hey, if we can get 100,000 calls, that'd be awesome. And that was effectively kind of the main goal there. And there were some revenue goals, but because it was such a novel experience, I don't know if people really understood like where this could go. And so the way that it all kind of happened was actually through several marketing agencies that work directly with Netflix. And so they're the ones that kind of came up with the idea. We worked with them to be able to pitch them, like say, hey, we think that your brand should be able to collaborate on this, and then be able to see how this goes. So it was very experimental. There was a lot of edge cases where this could have not gone well, for sure. And so their goal was more around like 100,000 calls on this experience. I thought that would be amazing, and so it ended up 4xing it, which was really cool. So yeah, it was not as kind of focused, and this is like exactly the goal we need to get to. But from what they expected it to be, it ended up surpassing that at least.
That's amazing. And for such a powerful set of brands between Netflix, Pepsi, Doritos, Stranger Things, you almost, as a tech team, are under a fair amount of pressure because there's such strong brand value, and any sort of miss in the execution here
Yeah.
could really, there's a lot to lose. And
Hmm.
what I'm gauging from the experience is you call the phone number and you get to speak to one of those celebrities, and then they have something contextual that feels like a real phone call that then leads to the opportunity to record this message of hope, right? And so behind the scenes, what are some of the complexities in terms of getting this all really smooth?
Right. So this was a really good learning in terms of, I think, where the media entertainment industry generally is perceiving AI today. So the original experience that we're about to go live with was 100% AI generated voice conversation, meaning I call a number, they communicate with me as long as they want to, saying whatever they want to. This is maybe more analogous if you were to say, open up ChatGPT, hit that little circle button that says advanced voice mode, and you're just chatting with it. Now, that was the original experience. As we were going through the build, literally the founders of Stranger Things came in and said, "Hey, I actually don't really like how forward-looking this is in terms of its AI application. I know that this is where the industry is going. I prefer not to take us there. How can we kind of ratchet back this experience a little bit where we can still be able to drive fan activation while not leaning fully into this AI world?" And I saw that and I read that, and while it was disappointing in terms of, we had been building this specific experience, which we thought that could be the experience would be much more creative, more interesting, more entertaining. I totally understood like where they were coming from with that. And so what we ended up having to do is like almost create more of a game versus a straight voice AI experience where it's almost more similar to like an IVR experience, meaning press this for that, press this for that, and it randomizes it and like kind of gives a caller to go down a certain path versus just literally talking to a David Hasselhoff type of person. And so the creativity around it needed to be pulled back a little bit, but that ended up, and it actually was much harder to develop because just sending a transcript to a voice agent to come back with is much simpler to be able to build. You have to make sure that edge cases are worked out, and you have to test it a lot. There's a bunch of tools now available that allow you to do that. But actually, to build, to go back on that to build more of a deterministic experience versus a probabilistic experience was much more difficult. But thankfully, ended up still kind of providing folks with a really good experience. And I extrapolated that learning across like a lot of different companies in media entertainment, and frankly, just a lot of companies in the economy today. There's a way that you could do it that's like already forward thinking. It's way out there. You see startups already really pushing the bounds in terms of innovation. But in reality, if you do that, there's a lot of brand risk that comes with it. And people are scared of that about that future. And instead of saying, don't okay, cool, like, they're not going to make it, let's actually just find some level of a hybrid. Let's start testing the waters a little bit. So then the next activation, you could really push the bounds because you have more confidence in the systems that you're building. And so that was some of the stories that were happening behind the scenes, and it makes a ton of sense in terms of what the creators were thinking. It also was a little bit sad because I thought we could really push the bounds in terms of just straight voice AI generated activation. So if anybody's looking to kind of take that next step and do that, like there's a ton there that we can go work on.
Yeah, I actually want to get into that because I think in your case you get to be at the forefront of getting to work with these really noticeable, high scale, high impact folks. That's awesome that the founders of Stranger Things were in kind of the dev room with you guys too. And then on the other side, you're also having to kind of weave together the tools that are available and build a little bit of your own to create kind of the experience that matches the intent here. So we don't usually like doing this, but in your case, since you have a front row seat to kind of the future compared to the rest of us here, where do you think this might go with these new capabilities available? What do you think this new, and everyone has access to it compared to before where you had to really get a lot of stamps and approvals before you could have your voice or your idea heard and produced into something. So I'm curious what you think the landscape might move towards in this media entertainment space.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and a couple of thoughts to kind of get the conversation going on this piece. I think people are perceiving let's maybe like scope the conversation to more what I'm seeing in like voice, photo generation, and also like video generation in AI. When I think people are trying to compare it too much to to like what we see today on like video and photos. I actually think it's a new medium, but obviously is like a really close cousin of what we've been used to.
Hmm.
The best example I was reading about was comparing a play to film, and like I think people tried to compare it at first because they're like, wow, imagine like a moving play, and
Hmm.
that was a film. But in reality, those are completely different mediums. It allows you to do very different things. There's room for both, likely. There's a problem to be solved with different types of audience that each medium can support. And so I think we're kind of stuck in perceiving this new medium, which is allowing anybody to be able to create like relatively high quality photo, media, audio, and it's only going to get better. And people are comparing it to what, you know, like a full-fledged production of like a video again or photo or voice could look like, which is fair, but I don't think I think it's missing the point a little bit. And like there will be like room for this media, but I think we should be leaning in a little bit more in terms of thinking about the new capabilities that will now exist with this new media form, and stop trying to compare it to this previous one. And so I'll pause there for a second, but I think if we can distill, if we can separate those two, then we'll view this with like a much more clear-eyed kind of um uh kind of like a childlike lens to be like, wow,
Hmm.
like this is a lot of stuff that you can do here. Like, but again, let's not compare it. Let's just like think about it from ground zero and see what we can do with it.
Yeah, I like this a lot because I think instead of comparing to a movie, you could compare it to text, right? And AI being able to generate video off of someone's text input, an idea, where you can get like a much longer tail of ideas coming out there without needing all the production costs and like the filters that the current media has is one way. I've got kind of a half-baked thought that maybe you can help me like whole poke or soundboard. And this is kind of based off of, if you think about video games, there's a lot of work every year that goes into making the next version of Madden or NBA 2K or whatever more realistic. And then these folks had all of our captive audience for anyone who wanted to overlap between sports and gaming. And then fantasy came around with the most crude graphics, right? Like a lot of the early ones just look like literally like a database spit out in front of you, but allowed us to be like owners, general managers of
Mm.
teams versus the players.
Yep.
And while there was this whole industry optimizing for making the gameplay more realistic, fantasies made 100 times more money
Right.
than the original games have. And it seems similar to me. The other one that comes to mind is like Netflix, even back in the DVD days. Uh, I have a hunch, and maybe you know more closer facts about this, that they were able to develop their algorithm in part because they weren't restricted by the real estate that Blockbuster had to have like genre specific to different aisles, and
Mm.
instead,
Mm.
think about infinite number of aisles for infinite number of personas and customers,
Right.
and do matching there. And this, like you call it childlike, maybe a beginner mindset of thinking about things kind of more from the outside and what does this do for human entertainment
Yeah.
versus what am I trying to do to be better than my competitor or better than last year.
Mm.
Are sort of thoughts that I try and remember when we're working with our clients and figuring out ways to sort of zoom out and innovate for their industry versus try and optimize their business plan for compared to last year.
Yeah, yeah. No, the fantasy and video game example is really, really interesting. I remember playing, like waiting in line to go buy like Madden, whatever,
Totally.
2010, and but the how active I was with fantasy in high school versus or in college versus like playing Madden, I was much more invested because it gave me a piece of ownership, like you're mentioning. It made me feel like an owner. And I think a similar type of thing is happening right now too. Like when you create something on these image gen models or these like photos, like again, the quality of it is for most people it's still kind of whatever. It's not there yet, but it's magical, right? Like you feel like you can point to that thing and say I created that. Whereas if I'm scrolling TikTok or even if I'm recording myself, it just feels like I'm not as much of a active participant in that new media form. And so, yeah, I really love that example of like the fantasy versus video games and how much larger of an industry it became because you were more of an owner in that. That makes a ton of sense.
I do want to know, for a firm as young as yours, getting to work with someone like Netflix, Pepsi, Stranger Things, there's there got to be an interesting story about how you managed to convince these folks to take a risk on a small firm versus going with, the big player in your space or whoever their media agencies were historically using. How did that all come about?
Yeah, looking back at it, it makes like a ton of sense in terms of how the story comes out. But as you know, I'm telling the narrative, in retrospect. But I think there are a couple key lessons that we learned from that we're trying to instill with us moving forward into next year. I think there's like three main ones. Like the first one is this idea of building products in this space that we think the broader industry will find more interesting, maybe a few months or a year beforehand, because we're like experimenting with these new tools, and I can speak about that a little bit. The second one is like a focus on partnership, specifically partnering with the new types of kind of tech platforms that are coming out because of AI. In the early days, and trying to develop those really close relationships with them, that then they can kind of connect to with bigger clients, bigger opportunities. Um, and the third is just like kind of carrying over like some of the professionalism that, our team, myself, like we've learned at these big companies while mixing it with like a startup energy, I think has been really helpful, not just for Netflix, but for a bunch of other clients too. And I can kind of hit on any of those three. Should I start with the first one, second one, third one? Which one would be
Yeah, I
helpful?
want I want all of the above in this
Okay.
case.
Yeah, I think the the it's very much so like an intuition because the space is changing so fast, and the broader AI kind of space. There's so many new things that are happening all the time, and we have a mandate as a team. I give a mandate to our team to really be pushing the bounds in terms of like testing out new tools and experimenting. One thing that I was finding a lot of fun with, even as early as like October and 24, was using voice. Specifically, I was kind of talking to ChatGPT. I was transcribing things. I was just realizing that this is a much better way to be able to interact with technology, just using your voice. And I think we all have that intuition, but the technology wasn't really there before to be able to allow that. We're experimenting with platforms like 11 Labs, and I was finding myself like not really typing that much. And one of the use cases that I was experimenting with was journaling. People say how journaling is like really good for your mental health, and I agree with that. Sometimes I have a hard time finding time to sit down and write or type. And then if
Mhm.
I'm writing, I can't read my writing because it's so bad. And if I'm typing, I get distracted because I have my laptop open. And
Mhm.
so I found that like speaking to my phone into ChatGPT and like journaling every day and asking it to act like a therapist or act like a internal family system therapy, whatever. Like it was helping me kind of like understand myself better. And so then I kind of went to our team and we had a little bit of dead time going into the holidays last year. Um, Pushed our team to say, hey, like let's just like build a product in the next month that's a voice journal. And they're like, Jay, have you done any market analysis on any of this stuff? It's like, not really. Like, let's just ship. Let's just see what happens. Let's just explore this. That's
Mhm.
originally how we started our business. We just kind of had an intuition about a product that we wanted to build, built it, ended up growing. That helped us close our first set of agency customers. And this was kind of the next version of that a year later. And we had a
I'm
sprint.
curious,
Yeah,
like
go for it.
before we move on from that, you had a team already, and in the early days, this could be like a pretty big distraction. And at the same time, I think in the early days,
Yeah,
the founder instinct matters a lot, and there's an analysis paralysis. So, what
yeah,
were the trade-offs, and how did you kind of buckle this all together?
yeah. Um, I'd be lying if I had some like beautiful strategy kind of orientation around it. I think it was more just like intuition and then trusting the intuition.
Hmm.
Because we had just done it a year before where it was just based off of kind of my own pain point of something that I wanted to build, really push the team to do it in a short amount of time to see what can happen. And then that ended up kind of helping us a lot. So it was just kind of trying to just lean into that even more. Say, okay, cool, if we just did this, like I trust our intuition, why don't we just do this again? And so thankfully, it wasn't so much of a distraction because we're kind of heading into the holidays with a little bit more time off. Um, and frankly, like our business hadn't grown as much as what it is like even like this year. It's not we weren't drowning in work either, frankly. And so yeah, like that there was a sprint. We ended up shipping a voice journal where it's called Yap. You can still go experiment with it right now and like play around with it. And what we kind of took away from that was like a learning and how to build like a voice agent, which not a lot of teams had been doing outside of the main like voice labs, like 11 Labs and some of these like bigger companies. And so what that ended up doing is like other people came in and said, "Hey, I saw your product. Like, I want to build a version of that for this industry or for that industry or for this thing. It'd be really cool if I could do that." And so we ended up actually working with, I think, another two to three more clients where we were building a voice agent, like very off the back of a very simple mobile app that we had shipped. And so then it started to kind of like build up a little bit more of experience. And one day I was speaking with the lead engineer on that. His name is Sean. And I was asking him like, what are you using to build all this stuff? And he started to rave about this platform called LiveKit, and
Hmm.
LiveKit is like the orchestration layer for voice agents. We
Hmm.
later learned that ChatGPT is powered by LiveKit. And so this is kind of where like the BD lens came in, where all these companies are early. They're all growing extremely fast, but the teams are small. Everybody kind of knows each other, fear and AI. And so I just found like five people of their leadership team on LinkedIn. It was like, hey, like, I see that you guys are crushing it. We built 5 voice agents already on your stack. If you ever need help with like implementing your platform with other customers, like let us know. Like the CEO reached back out. We had a nice conversation. Was showing him all the stuff that we had built, and he had data on it as well because it was all built on his platform. Um, and then kind of left it at that. And then a couple months later, the head of BD there was like, "Hey, we have this really large marketing agency that wants to do a big activation. Could I put you in touch? Because that's not our business. We don't really do implementation work. We're a platform." I was like, happy to help. And then that ended up leading to the contract with Omnicom, with GSP, which are the marketing agencies that did the project with Netflix. And so it's kind of like looking back on it, it feels like much more coherent of a narrative. But I think it's like build stuff that you have an intuition for where the world is going to go, so you can build some capabilities and learnings in it. And then two, try to go work with those vendors that are powering that new trend, so then you can say, "Hey, you be the platform. We'll help with the services and implementation, and we can kind of go to business together."
That's super smart. I think there's another adage I think that's like first time founders focus on product and it's
Right.
second time founders that focus on distribution. And it seems like you skipped a step there. And you mentioned something about BD. So where did you get those instincts?
I think thankfully I've done that. That's what I've been doing with my career over the past 5.5 years. I started in like a sales development role at LinkedIn. I moved into the product partnerships BD team shortly after that. I've always had an eye towards like sales and marketing. I've been creating content for about like five to 10 years, almost 10 years now, and so I kind of hopefully I can read all the YC articles so I don't have to do the first time founder stuff, right? And I don't, I'm not a builder. Like I'm not an engineer. I build other stuff, and so I'm not even good at it. And so if I could do distribution work first, then that'd be great. And that's where I learned a lot of my skills as well within the LinkedIn BD stuff. And so that comes more naturally to me for sure.
Some follow ups here. So I love that, we talk about distribution and it's coming into play here again, where making the relationships with the private equity firms gives you access to the portfolio companies. And there's a multiplier in there. You kind of picked 1 to 5 billion AUM, and it sounds like the type of thing when we define an ICP that the builders can overthink. Is what I've kind of learned later as I've talked to more folks who have kind of done that, and they said, "Nah, I just didn't think I could do this for a company more than 200 people." So I said 200 or fewer, and that was my start, and it wasn't super strategic. And I'm curious, in your case, how did you arrive at that 1 to 5, or any other pieces of your ICP there?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out too, to be honest. I
Hmm.
think I think like I have a hypothesis in terms of like that being a good vertical for us. I can riff on also, helping Fortune 2000s like head of AI, like who are not in tech, help them be like their tech team to implement AI. We're seeing good traffic
Hmm.
and traction in that space as well. So to be honest, like I have a couple of hypotheses that I want to kind of focus on in our ICP over the next, year. All of these folks have been coming inbound so far, but that's how I'm kind of building that signal a little bit.
Hmm.
Specifically in terms of the AUM of these PE firms, again, the thought is that if you're a really big firm, you already have people like us internally. You're just hire us full time, or people like us, right? PMs, engineers, whatever, data scientists, like people that understand AI. Like you'll have enough budget to hire them internally. We can still help them, but the willingness for them to purchase like our services will be lower. People that are maybe below a billion AUM may not have the budget or the willingness to then afford our fees and our services. And so we kind of found like maybe this 1 to 5, like they are they're big enough to be able to have the budgets, but they're not so big that they would just want to hire these people in house.
That
And
makes
so
a ton of
that's
sense for professional services
that's how I'm
firm like
thinking about
that.
it. If we
I love
talk in
it.
like 6 months, like maybe that'll likely change in some way.
And I think that the takeaway probably is like you didn't spend a ton of time figuring out where to get started. You put your thesis on paper, and then you went out to your the discipline that you talked about, and which acts as a very consistent form of data feedback when you experiment against it, and
Right.
um, and
Right.
that way you're not spending too much time analyzing this, and you're spending more time experimenting and creating
100%.
primary data. I love
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
While we're on the LinkedIn topic, I am curious: are you on team personalize the invite or just team just connect?
Both. Actually, yeah, no, actually, just connect. No personal invite. No personal connection. Unless you actually like have like a really thoughtful thing to say, like, "Hey, man, like, love the pod. Like, would love to like connect sometime." Like I think people that are more partners or builders or other founders, like I'll kind of give them that type. Like I actually do want to. I know them before I'm saying something.
Hmm.
If I literally don't know who they are at all, then I don't say anything. And I just connect with them. We see that response rates are higher when you do that versus just like insert AI generated slop. So yeah, I think it's if I know them, then I'll say something personal. I'll make it look like a text, like literally like low caps, spelling
Hmm.
mistakes, like look like a text. And then if I
No
don't
M
know them, I just
dashes.
no M dash, definitely no M dashes. I literally put spelling mistakes in my notes, just so I look real. And thankfully, I'm kind of dumb with like spelling anyway, so it's not like that's extra work for me. But yeah, people don't really know anymore, and so you just want to be as authentic as possible. So yeah, I don't hit them up and add connection until
And this is
unless I actually
something
know them.
you sort of got to work on too, sort of in terms of verification
Yeah,
in
and
LinkedIn.
trust and yeah,
And
yeah,
I imagine there's like the LinkedIn equivalent of catfishing that was maybe one of the problems. And then today there's going to be like a bunch of AI generated profiles. Um,
oh yeah.
what was some of the impetus behind the verification? And then like, what's your gut in terms of how important that's going to be going forward?
Oh yeah, I think it's going to be extremely important. I think it's becoming more important. I think when we first were thinking about this, it it was a super fun way that this whole project kind of kicked off. I was effectively like tasked for a couple of months to explore what LinkedIn's opportunity could look like in Web3, which is
Sure.
of the time at the time.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we kind of narrowed in on was actually thinking about decentralized identity and like kind of credentialing and NFTs were like the way to do that, but it wasn't necessarily the only way to do it. And so we
Hmm.
actually ran a small pilot where we were issuing verifiable credentials from Microsoft to Microsoft employees to verify the fact that they've worked at Microsoft. Verification of like employment is a problem. There's this whole industry of a background check, right? A background check, reference check, like I think that's like a close to a $10 billion market. So not huge, but like big enough that that's like a problem, right? People always do a background check when they want to hire someone. Why? Because you
Hmm.
just want to make sure you trust them. Obviously identity verification as a problem. I think as we're doing that experiment, we realized that that's actually like, I mean, you verify your identity to do a lot of things, right? To go on DoorDash, to like so many consumer applications, you to kind of like do your little face check, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of work with in terms of like kind of driver's license. Like there's identity. It started with like some small kind of like experiment with like verifiable credentials. It expanded to work verification. It expanded to like identity verification, and then expanded to like education verification as well. Because all of those things are things that we're seeing on the LinkedIn platform that people were faking, and we've all kind of experienced this, right? You look at a profile, someone hitting you up, you're like, like, is this real? Like, what's happening
Mm-hmm.
here? And this isn't only associated to LinkedIn. This actually happens across a lot of different almost all social platforms. Is this idea of a fake romance? So people like hitting you up and like you were saying, like catfishing you. Same thing happens
Mm-hmm.
on LinkedIn too. The
Yep.
same thing used to happen on LinkedIn. And I think it was because it was like a more trustworthy platform. So you don't think it was actually going to happen there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these kind of impetus like led to making a pitch to the team to say like, hey, we need to roll out verification. And then like ChatGPT came out like near the end of that piece. And so now at this point, if you look at any social platform, like which one's the one you probably trust the most, right? Like I don't know, probably LinkedIn, maybe Twitter right
Mm-hmm.
behind it. But even Twitter like went through some craziness in terms of like trust on its platform. Definitely not
Mm-hmm.
Facebook or Instagram's a little bit, so and work is happening on LinkedIn. So I hope I hope that LinkedIn verification kind of sets a standard for what verification and trust should look like across like all social platforms and ideally like the internet at that point. Um, and so yeah, I think it's huge. I think there's a lot more work to be done there in terms of like making sure that who someone says they are like is real. But yeah, there's a lot there for sure.
And I mean, bringing it back to voice that you and your team work a lot on, 11 Labs allows me to clone my own voice
Hmm.
and makes it scary easy for others to clone my voice and, get on a phone call with someone who has access to my credit card information or something else and lead to identity theft. I'm
Hmm.
curious, like things that you're concerned about, other things that you're excited about when it comes to verification and voice.
It's the wild wild west, right? Like I think verification is similar to like cybersecurity. Like there's always going to be something that you'll solve something and then like attackers will kind of figure something else that you have to keep going. So I think verification, all this stuff, like kind of has a similar mental model where you maybe have solved like identity verification with like a social platform, but then a new technology comes out, and you're like, okay, how do I verify someone's real on like a phone call? Um,
Mm-hmm.
on a personal level, I've told my parents and my family not to answer any calls for me, really, at all. My voice is out there. I've cloned my voice as well. I have like a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of like content that you can like learn from. Like like, someone can easily like within an afternoon just like clone my voice, make it sound like me, everything, and then like call people through my phone. I don't know how exactly that works, but it's happening. And so, creating a safe word with your family and everything, I think actually should be something that most people should do, because I think that's going to get much worse in the future. I don't know how that gets solved, to be honest, because if they have enough data about you through podcasts and through like your social, like LinkedIn or whatever, they could actually really sound like you. I just think we need to have like a safe word that maybe that we have to roll back to that as like the verification system instead of anything super technologically advanced. Over time, that'll happen. I don't have an intuition in terms of what that would be yet.
Yeah, I mean, two factor, maybe another one. I know, like, you probably get this now with the CEO founder title where folks are hitting up your employees, asking them to buy gift
Oh my
cards and stuff.
God. Oh my
And
God.
we usually had the thing that, hey, you have to verify this over Slack,
Mhm.
just like as the
Yes.
second factor, just assuming that there's just a little bit more security around that versus going purely based off of a text message and now voice. And I mean, we
Totally.
may or may not have like trained our moms for a while by not calling for so long that uh, they should feel like something is fishy
Yeah,
already.
exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
Why is my Desi boy calling me right now?
I love that you've been at the forefront of not just voice, but also AI adoption for a number of big tech firms, for hedge funds, PE firms. And there's trends that emerge. And I love this post that you wrote. We'll make sure to have links to it in the show notes as well. What I'm going to do is, in terms of where to get started with AI, I'm going to read out kind of one of the points you raised, and I'd love to have you add some color commentary. So we've got a ton of listeners who are entrepreneurs, founders of more traditional businesses, but fairly established, which is a double-edged sword when the paradigm shifting here. So the first one is start where change is already happening.
Right. Yeah. My a previous or point to kind of frame this up. I think those that are traditional businesses, like we've been finding we've been having a lot of fun like helping them kind of think through stuff. I've been making a lot of flights out to like Indianapolis, to Detroit, to San Antonio, to Cincinnati, like, and it's
Mm-hmm.
been so much more rewarding sometimes, to work with folks that are just like on the coast. And so I love the people. Like, it just, yeah, it's been really rewarding to really sit down and learn from them and try to help them with this transition. Because it can be, yeah, it can be scary. Yeah. So the first point around like, yeah, where change is already happening. Um, what the story that's bubbling up for me, we're working with a client that is going through a CRM migration. And they have, like, let's say 50 employees on their sales team, and they're transitioning from one CRM to the other one over the next like 6 to 9 months, and they've already, there's a more baked up process in terms of what that looks like. They have to hire an agency to be able to map out the processes. It's going to take like 6 months. All this stuff is going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so the team is already ready for change, right? Because, like, oh, like, not they're not necessarily excited for change, but they know that their executives have been saying, you're going to have to do these trainings, you're going to have to like learn these new systems, you're going to have to do all these things. And so depending on the timing of like where that is at, ideally it's like kind of in the first like quarter, first half of that kind of change management. Maybe we
Mm-hmm.
lay in a little bit of AI implementation work in there as well. So, for example, with that same company that's going through, they're moving from like a Airtable instance to HubSpot. Cool. As they're doing that, why don't we also just sit down with their team and say, what are the different workflows that we can start to automate using AI? And then how do we actually guide this implementation to make sure that the records in those Airtable and HubSpot instances, are these ones are really cleaned up, and these ones are really being transferred first, because then we can actually pull that out and build an automation on top of it. Or maybe you don't even have to go through like this big of a transition, because the key pieces of data that we can use for these key workflows that we're about to automate with AI, we don't even need like that big of a lift to do all this stuff. We just need these three fields, and that's it. I think there's like a system change thing that if it's already happening, maybe we can also kind of work with it as well. There's a PE portfolio company that's going through a transition to like put all their work on ServiceNow. And when we kind of did some level of discovery with them, and said, here's all the automation opportunities that your team is bubbling up and that we've been hearing from you, there was some stuff that was all like kind of ServiceNow related work. And we kind of said, great, like, you guys do that. Here's some ideas now based off what we learned that you should actually ask your ServiceNow implementation partner to implement. We're going to focus on another work stream. And then now it's actually combining. We're actually jointly working on the transitions together, because there's a lot of overlap between the work that we're doing. So that's kind of what I mean by, like, if change is already happening in an organization, and the leader already is pushing the bounds and the team is already ready for that change, like, maybe this is actually where you should prioritize where to implement AI in a more major way.
I love that. I think the other piece oftentimes is that we hate to see AI lose credibility because it was implemented trying to solve a problem that wasn't worth solving. And if they've already made this tectonic decision around something major, it's likely because there was some big opportunity or pain point that they were chasing. So there's a
Yep.
lot of meat on the bone there for
Right.
a solution to drive some outcomes. The
Yep.
next one you talked about was start where you already have influence.
Mhm. Yeah. So we've also started to work with some pretty larger enterprises, like Fortune 500s. We're working with a insurance provider that does like over 10 billion in revenue. And we've been brought in by their head of AI to be able to help different business units within their company to like help with AI adoption. The way that we've thought about it is that there's like some level of education and training, like we just talked about, which, if you can do it correctly, you can then kind of channel that excitement and energy that they get themselves, like these leaders themselves, of how to use AI, how to use ChatGPT, how to use Claude, how to play around with lovable, like, fun stuff that then kind of opens up the mind to say, oh wow, like, if I'm doing this like small level of profitability analysis using ChatGPT, like I have a team of 30 people that does this every quarter. Like, how can we actually help them move much faster using these tools? And then we can kind of
Mhm.
transition that into like a real production ready project. And um, when I was working with the head of AI to see where to start, a lot of it was based off of relationships, right? So I knew that he had, and he told me he had a really good relationship with like one division leader, one business unit leader. They had known each other for a while. This like lead has known in the company over the past 10 years of being really ahead of the curve in terms of any technical implementation. And he also has a lot of influence to be able to guide IT to be able to make certain decisions as
Mhm.
well when these need to go from this is really cool to production ready systems. And so we kind of worked through that like prioritization and we're like, great, why don't we go focus our efforts on helping this team get up to speed in terms of education and AI? Because I think this will open up a bunch of opportunity for this team, but also all their other teams that this person has a ton of influence on. And so the same things that happen even at like growth stage startup, where now we're working with like a company that does like 50 million in revenue. And when I was speaking with the CEO and founder, he's like, "Go work with the head of sales. Like he loves AI. It's like he's like cooking up on end to end and like building all these automations. Like he's already like way ahead of the curve. He just needs help to accelerate it more. And so that was much easier to do because the leader is like just like get in there, figure it out. Like let's work together. And so I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say in terms of like, where you have the influence, like will make it easier for you to go through and roll out that you don't have to kind of run into like people that don't really want to change, people that, like just don't care about the stuff, have too many hesitations around it. Like that'll exist. Just don't start there. Like build the winnings, build the capabilities elsewhere. So then they're like, oh shit, I need that in my team versus needing to go sell that team on it first.
I love this. And when we built an entity called Ford Labs within Ford, and this was something we were very specific about, was asking for the hand raisers. We were trying to
Yep.
basically bring about a new way of working in the software teams there. And we started with the hand raisers, folks who weren't allowed to work this way until
Hmm.
then, but
Right.
would on any of their side projects or go to those conferences and listen to that kind of stuff
Right.
versus trying to spread this adoption effort across everybody or
Yep.
go after the wrong folks and then end up with having to swim upstream versus
Yep.
having folks who are going to kind of paddle alongside you, right?
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah, no, I think it's the same thing. It's like this is just the newer, this is like another version of that, right? Where it's like find the champions, like push them, like make them feel heard, rewarded, compensated, make them a celebrity in your
Yeah,
company.
give them a
Um,
stage.
Give them
Totally.
a stage, get them to come on all hands, talk about all the cool stuff that they're doing. Because then people that are like, ambitious, they want to be like that person. They're going to start reaching out. They're going to become champions. Our best work is when like we don't have to be there for a long time, because like we've like kind of found like a couple champions that are just like they're getting up to speed and like they have the organizational context. It's like if you need us, great. If not, like you guys do it now because we've hopefully gotten them up to speed. That's
Hmm.
not the best for long-term revenue for the business, but it feels rewarding because
Yep.
we've been successful then in those engagements.
Yeah, and I mean, my experience there is that those early influencers, um, similar to their employees having an adoption curve, their peers within the companies have that adoption curve too,
Hmm.
and you start to probably get phone calls from their peers once things have been proven out within, and you've
Yep.
already gotten the contracts negotiated and all the other stuff that
Yep.
the folks who are later on the curve usually don't want to go out and stick their neck and deal with procurement and everything else, and
Right.
so
Right.
identifying those influential buyers makes a ton of sense. The next one you have here is regulations matter.
Yeah, I think when you're working with executives at some of these financial services firms, these private equity firms, some of these like healthcare, health tech companies, I think people get really nervous about AI because there's just a lot of news out there around like is it trustworthy, like where's my data going, is it private, like who's owning it, like all those different pieces, which are all very valid concerns. But sometimes like not every part of the business needs to be on the same level of risk. Like it's not the same level of a risk calculation, right? If you're working with like a major healthcare institution, not every part of their business needs to kind of have like compliance up to 100. if their
Hmm.
marketing team may not touch any PHI, may not touch anything related to patient data, and it's just actually like creating collateral, right? That's just like scraped from public resources. Great. Why don't we go start with them first, right? Um,
Hmm.
in the financial services use case, like we're working with like a $20 billion IRA. There's a part of their business which is like we manage all of the wealth for a bunch of these like 100 millionaires and billionaires. How about we just don't touch that right now? Why don't we go make like other parts of the business more effective first that don't have anything to do with like the actual financial information of your clients? And then like as we're growing, we'll build up the confidence in those businesses and then we'll take our time to make sure that we're implementing the technology correctly for this business, right? We'll pull in the right legal teams, we'll pull in procurement, we'll start implementing an open source version of a model, we'll like get in your environment, we'll do all this like important work that needs to happen, but we don't need to wait for all of that to happen to actually get started because we should just be focused on the teams that the regulations aren't as like stringent. Then you get started. Otherwise, I've seen companies spend years and they're still on it. They're like, we need to figure out everything before we start implementing stuff. And I feel confident about that from the LinkedIn days, actually. I mean, we were rolling out identity verification on one of the largest social platforms in the world with governments in the EU, in India, like across the US. If you thought if any kind of like landmine of a potential legal issue and policy issue and regulatory issue was all baked into that, right?
Hmm.
And we had to go speak with the EU. We had to go speak with the Indian government. There was a ton of stuff, and I was able to kind of be on the front lines of a lot of those conversations, which was super fun. And my learning was like work back from the problem to be solved first. Like then like start to think about all the different security guardrails, compliance guardrails, regulatory guardrails you need to put in place to solve that problem. Don't just go and just put on the regulations before you even know what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And so if we're able to do that, and you haven't heard about any negative issues around it in the news, right? Like there's a way to do it that you're still able to solve a problem while not getting caught up in all the compliance and regulatory pieces. A lot of that is just starting where you don't need those things, and then like kind of making sure that making sure that you're actually tackling it from a problem first perspective instead of just like bringing out like this, the digital version of like a big rules book and just saying like hit all these things. Like I know that's not needed to actually get this stuff live. So I think that's kind of what I was referring to in terms of like the regulations matter.
I love that. And something that I'm remembering here that I learned the hard way was that there's in the regulation, there's usually a regulation expert, right? Whether it's the FDA expert, the HIPAA
Mhm.
expert, and it's rare, and they're usually seen as like this like evil, slow down, constraint kind of person versus someone who can be used as like a collaborator or fellow problem solver.
Yeah.
And so what happens sometimes is we ideate, we come up with all this stuff without
Right.
consulting them. We build a thing and then we send it to FDA approval. And
Yeah.
it's so much better life when you can invite them into your ideation and discovery sessions.
Totally. Yep.
And they will invite that so much too, where they
Yeah.
have an opportunity to actually participate and do the
100%.
authorship. And then they'll show you where the loopholes and the gray areas and stuff are that they feel
Exactly.
comfortable playing in
Yep.
versus the stuff that's just hard stop and hard green
Yep.
that that notion of regulation gets passed down through
Yeah.
assumption that eventually becomes almost like superstition or tradition that no one wants to
Yes.
touch. And having
Yeah.
that person in the room just makes your life so
Yeah.
much easier. And
100%.
that's something else that I had to learn the hard way that I wanted to bring up. Hey man,
Yeah.
as we're wrapping up here, there's a few things that I like to get to know our guests a little bit better. You're building a team now, and I'm curious if you've got like a North Star team that either you've been on or you have as like an inspiration as you're making decisions about your culture and empowering your people.
Feel like I've been kind of a broken record about talking about this verification stuff, but it definitely like made such a huge impact on my life and my career. I think that team was like awesome. There was like a core four of us, where it was myself, my director of BD, our head of product, and like kind of head of engineering, and that team was so good. And it was actually led predominantly by the head of engineering who had come over from Facebook, and he was there for like 12 years, I think. He had done so well at Facebook from like, kind of like the vintage of like the late 2000s, early 2010s. that he had retired, and he was relaxing, and then he's like, I just need to do more work. Like I was getting bored, and so he came in and he started leading the trust teams at LinkedIn. And he was so talented, he was so good. He could handle himself in any conversation, whether it was like the product thinking, the BD, the sales, the obviously the edge, the policy, the legal. He knew everything like so well, and it was so inspiring. Um, and so like he like that level of kind of one thing that he gave me feedback on in a positive light when we were doing performance reviews is that he's like Jay is always responsive, and that was like maybe obvious, but I think that has really been instilled in our culture at the company where it's like if you're client facing, which most people are, like I expect like almost near immediate responses to our clients. That doesn't mean that like you need to be up at like 1 a.m. or anything responding to them, but it does mean that, if you're on and you're on your phone or your laptop, like just say what's up, say acknowledge, I'll get back to you, say something. And if not, tag me in so I can come in and say something. That's very important for our culture. And like we're in a services business, like, you've been, and it's like that's very important. Um, I think the other piece of leadership that I learned was from my manager at the time. And he always like brought me into like everything that was important like right away. And there was never any like information withholding. I was always in the room with him, or if not, then I got the lowdown right afterwards. He forwarded all the important emails. Like I was very synced in with him, and he didn't hold any information. And I think I've tried to maintain that, where mostly everything is public. I try to like kind of distill that information from clients or partners or what I'm learning or people just to the junior employee on our team, just so because the incentive for me is like they all get up to speed faster, right? And so yeah, I've learned a ton from that team. I try to embody that a lot for our company.
That's awesome. That last piece is something that I think might go into the first time founder, second time founder thing, where
Mm.
delegation and getting yourself outside of being a constraint is something
Yeah,
that doesn't come naturally at first when we get to do everything and it's exciting, and then you realize that you're the bottleneck.
yeah,
And information sharing is probably one of the easiest ways to get out of that,
yep,
whether it's around domain specific context or vision specific context, so that folks can kind of take inputs and make a decision without you being there. And
totally.
what is the best way for folks to get a hold of yourself or your team?
You can find me on LinkedIn, JaySingh. My email is j@CasperStudios.xyz. Um, yeah, if you're friends with the host, you can just shoot me a text as well. So yeah, get a hold of us, especially if your audience is those that are kind of really building and have built these really successful businesses, specifically in the Rust Belt and the Midwest and just outside the coast. Like I don't know, like maybe it's like the PE distribution and some of our customers that are kind of in these. It kind of reminds me a little bit more about like working with Canadians, and I'm enjoying that a lot. Not to say that we're not going to be working with people on the coast, but I really want to kind of be on a flight, go explore like the rest of the United States, and try to help these businesses out. So yeah, you can get a hold of us across any of those channels.
Awesome. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for making the time for us here. This has been super fun.
Thanks, man.
Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed that chat with Jay Singh from Casper AI. There's a few things that I took away from the episode that I'm going to try and remember, and I wanted to share them here. One of the biggest ones there is around how this level of transformation requires real leadership engagement. In that Netflix activation story, for example, I loved how the creators of Stranger Things were directly involved with the shaping of the experience. It wasn't just the agency or Jay's technical team building something in isolation. The creative leadership had a hand in how AI showed up in the brand and how the audience could really experience it. I thought that was amazing and very different than what I'm seeing a lot of the time, where it's being delegated to the technical teams. When AI touches your customer interaction, your brand voice, your risk, or your long-term positioning, these are really strategic executive level decisions. And I think owners and CEOs need to be in the room. Now, you don't have to write code, but you do need to shape the direction, share your vision, what winning looks like, and then rumble back and forth with the technical team so the AI execution or whatever technology execution is a seamless extension of your brand to your consumers, not a Frankenstein-like bolt-on. Another observation is around experimentation. As owners and founders, we might be conditioned to place really big bets. We raise capital, we hire teams, we commit to multi-year roadmaps, and I don't know, isn't going to respond really well with the paradigm being so new to big bets. I think it's going to reward the folks who are willing to experiment in smaller cycles, move fast, learn quickly, and then figure out where to place those big bets. So open the tools up yourself, test the workflows, build rough internal prototypes on the weekend. I think that's how you're going to develop this intuition about this new world. And that intuition is going to inform better strategic decisions later and feel like magic. The small experiments are what is going to give you confidence and clarity when it comes time to placing those big bets to scale, so you're not halted and you don't slow yourself down. I also appreciated that list of where to get started. A lot of the organizations we do office hours with stall because I think they're overthinking it. His framework was pretty simple, practical. I couldn't disagree with a lot of it. Start where change is already happening. Start with people who are already interested and curious. Start with where you as a leader have influence. And start maybe in areas where regulation is not going to freeze your momentum. I think the sequencing and where you get started can reduce risk and also help people get started if you know a little bit more about where you're less likely to get stalled. I think there's also a pretty important distinction between experimentation and production. And rapid prototyping is very valuable. It helps surface assumptions, uncover new ideas and opportunity. But once you start to see real traction, you got to make a decision about where you're switching from these vibe-coded prototypes into real production. Production systems require discipline. They have to handle scale, edge cases, compliances, variance in real-world usage, so that your customers, your users, even if they're internal, feel like this is really helping versus a friction point. And I think that's where experienced engineering teams like the one I ran at Integral and the one that Jay's running at Casper really matter. There's a huge difference between a clever demo and infrastructure that supports real business and mission-critical workflows, and ultimately are going to generate revenue and profit for you. What stood out to me about Jay and his team is that they operate in both environments. They can help brands with creating consumer-facing AI experiences, as well as work inside complex organizations like hedge funds and in private equity firms and their portfolios, where you're going to have a lot more high stakes and precision needs. And working across both, I think, is going to funnel a much faster innovation cycle. The combination is uncommon, and it's something that we put a lot of extra effort into at Integral as well. I think it's a useful signal for owners and founders who are deciding who to trust when it comes to your meaningful AI initiatives. If this conversation sparked something for you, whether it's around where to start with AI, how to sequence your experimentation and what you prioritize, how to think about brand and risk and other things you might be afraid about, or whether you're ready to move from your vibe-coded prototypes into production, those are the kind of things that I love talking about in our office hours in this new phase of my work. If you're looking for a soundboard on AI strategy, your operating model or your business models, or a specific workflow where you have a hunch AI could help and you might need to rethink, even if it's just a gut check on whether you're overthinking it or whether it's time to move forward, reach out. These office hour sessions I join most of them myself. They're very curated and facilitated with surgical precision. People usually leave with a lot more clarity and confidence around their ideas, and will help you get unstuck around friction points that are slowing you down today in terms of using AI to grow your business. In a lot of the cases, once that pressure comes down a bit because of the facilitators in the room, you're going to also have a lot of room to be creative and have some fun with this shift instead of feeling like it's something that's overwhelming or scary. 30 to 45 minutes is usually plenty of time with the way we facilitate these sessions to unblock meaningful progress for your team and you. In order to schedule some time, email us at officehours@convergence.fm and we'll set up some time to get on the phone with you. We'll be back next week with another episode of Convergence.fm, and we'll see you there. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.